and welcome to Cult Movie Cult, where we watch and discuss the horrific, the obscure, and the flat-out strange from the other side of cinema. I'm Mark Dickerson.
And I'm Jeremy Fink, and today we're coming at you with a brand new series. It's time to fire up your VCR and blow the dust off those game cartridges. This is 8-Bit at Blockbuster, 90s video game movie adaptations.
Hey guys, cheer up. Things will get worse. We ain't got no water anywhere. Food's bad, so's the air. Got no resources in a great big stupor. All because of the evil King Koopa.
You know the law, Toad.
Hey, wait a minute. You can't arrest a guy for just singing a song.
For anti-Koopa songs, we can. Plumbers!
No, he is. I'm just apprenticing.
Get in the car!
But I didn't do
Get in the
nothing.
car!
Are you telling us that you can arrest a guy for being a plumber? Get out of here!
Get in there, plumber!
Name.
Mario.
Last name.
Mario.
Okay, what's your name?
Luigi.
Luigi?
No, Luigi Mario.
Okay, how many Marios are there between the two of you?
There's three. There's Mario, and Luigi Mario.
I'll kill that plumber!
Trust the fungus.
Trust the fungus.
Super Mario Bros., also known as Super Mario Bros. The Movie, is a 1993 adventure comedy film loosely based on the Mario video game series by Nintendo. This was the first feature-length live-action film to be based on a video game. The film was directed by the husband and wife team of Rocky Morton and Annabelle Jankel, written by Parker Bennett, Terry Runte, and Ed Solomon. It follows the story of the Mario brothers, played by Bob Hoskins and John Leguizamo, in their quest to rescue Princess Daisy, played by Samantha Mathis, from a dystopic parallel universe ruled by the ruthless President Koopa, played brilliantly by the great, rest in peace, Dennis Hopper.
As always. All right. So we wanted to start off the year with a fun series, right, Jeremy? We just wanted to kind of not take anything too seriously right now, just because we haven't done an actual series in a while. We've done a couple specials and things like that. So we wanted to get back into doing series again, and we thought this would be a good idea, 90s video game adaptations, because there are four big ones to talk about, and Super Mario Brothers from 1993 was actually has the distinction of being the first adaptation of a video game on the screen. So this was the first time it was even attempted, which you can kind of tell from watching it.
Yes.
There's a lot of like firsts and kind of figuring out what to even do, I guess, would be the best way to describe it going on with this movie. A lot of behind the scenes things to discuss. So we're not going to be discussing stories too much here, certainly not beat by beat or anything like that. More just going to be talking about the actors, the story they ended up going with to film the movie, and of course the behind the scenes intrigue that was going on. There was a lot to discuss, so we'll kind of just jump right into it. First, by giving our impressions, and I will be the first to say I kind of like this movie. It's really weird. It's a really weird movie. Which, cult movies. This is now considered a cult film. At the time, like many cult films, it was considered a bomb and did not do well in the box office. But, with time and people looking back on it, people start to think, hey, they had some interesting ideas. And it is really weird. So it just kind of sticks out as being sort of like an anomaly, especially being based on such a famous franchise like that the Mario Brothers video games have become. To see this sort of like early incarnation or adaptation of it is really interesting, I think. Wikipedia says loosely based on, which I think is definitely accurate for this.
The key term is loosely.
Loosely, yeah. So Jeremy, I have to hear your thoughts on seeing this, because you've never seen this movie before. I want to know what you thought. Yeah.
definitely a lot of thoughts and responses.
Yeah.
So first off, I was looking at the release date because I was born in 1993, and this movie was released 6 days after I was born.
Oh,
so it's
wow.
interesting.
Okay, I didn't realize that.
It's interesting to know what was going on in the world when you enter the world, and apparently this Super Mario Bros.
Going on.
What was going on?
It explains a lot, Jeremy, I have to say.
Yeah, exactly. I thought this was a crazy piece of work. I grew up playing the Mario video games, but because like I said, I was kind of born in the thick of it. I wasn't an early adapter or anything like that. They were kind of already established culturally. So my experience with the Super Mario Bros. And Super Smash Bros. And all that growing up, and then later on Mario Kart and all the iterations of the game. I guess I'd never really thought of it too much as a narrative. In my mind, they were always kind of more just these fun characters, and I never even really gave too much consideration. And full disclaimer, I was not a huge gamer growing up. Like I like playing video games, but I wasn't deep into it, which is why this series should be interesting because I'm gonna get an education as we go along.
Yeah, the question is, was there really a story? I mean, to me, it was more. I mean, we'll talk about it more, but I think it was more just when they were creating this game, it was so early on in video game development even that they were kind of just putting these elements together to make an engaging and challenging video game. They weren't really, I mean, I'm speaking for Nintendo, of course, but I don't believe that they had much in mind as far as lore or story or world building or anything like that. That's why I think one of the reasons this movie is so interesting. And Jeremy, I guess I always forget how much younger you are than me. I was born in 1984, so I am like probably the peak demographic for this.
Yeah, I was going to say, you're probably,
So, and I definitely, I really do enjoy video games even to this day. I still, I'll break out whatever, the old games, I'll play them, or even some newer stuff. And I definitely played games back then when I was younger. But oddly, this movie went under my radar. I guess, I don't know, maybe I was just at a weird age for it where I wasn't really going to the theater much or whatever. I mean, I guess a lot of people didn't go to the theater for this one, but I don't think I even rented this movie at Blockbuster or anything. I don't really remember doing that. Actually, I discovered it way later. I was definitely aware of it. I remember seeing the commercials for it and the trailers and being like, oh, that looks weird. That doesn't look like Mario Brothers. That doesn't look like how I would picture a Mario Brothers movie looking, which apparently a lot of people had that same thought. But so I don't really remember it much from back then, but through the years I kind of revisited it or whatever, just kind of checked it out, and even this latest time watching it, I think there's so many interesting things going on that it is very entertaining. And of course, knowing, reading about all the behind the scenes stuff that was going on, and to me, it's just one of those movies that stands out. That's just very, I guess interesting is the word, for lack of a better word. It's just, there's a lot to dig into. So
it's an incredibly surreal piece of work. I am thinking about it right now, and I think one of the biggest pitfalls of the movie is probably not even a creative thing. It's more just that it had to be tied to Super Mario Bros.
Exactly.
And kind of didn't meet that expectation. Because when you look at the base story, the idea is, in terms of a cult film idea, which not that they were trying to make a cult film, as we've talked about before, generally when someone sets out trying to make a cult film, they never are able to make a good cult film. But in terms of a cult film concept, the idea of two plumbers being transported to this. First of all, I love that it was set in Brooklyn. I feel like during the 90s, you had Home Alone 2 and all these kind of movies that were always in New York City, but they were kind of written as if the outer boroughs didn't exist. And I actually live currently in a very Italian neighborhood in Brooklyn. And so this was cinema verite to me. Parts of it, I was like, oh yeah, that's, some of these details, they understood their...
Scapelli Plumbing is right next door to you.
Yeah, exactly. So, but just this idea of these kind of very Brooklyn, kind of grimy dudes going to fight an evil ruler in a world where people who look like people are descended from dinosaurs. And that people
wild.
Can be turned into mold. It's it's a really bizarre. And also, I thought this movie, if I saw this when I was 8 years old, I would have been terrified.
Yeah. Oh, it's because actually my daughter, who's she's a little over 3 years old, she walked in during some of it, and I was like, hey, this is Mario Brothers, because she had seen them. I had a t-shirt that had the Mario Brothers on it, and so she'd always point at them and be like, hey, there they are. So I was like, there they are on screen, and she was like, I don't like this. She was hiding her eyes. I'm like, I guess it's a little gruesome for a kid, but that's funny, because I'm sure they were setting out to make a family film, But I think part of the reason it didn't work is because so many different people behind the scenes had so many different ideas of what the movie should be. And I totally agree with you, Jeremy. I think its biggest flaw is that it had to be a Mario Brothers film.
Yeah.
It had to tie to the video games, which it's like they took that idea and they just made the craziest thing possible from it. I don't know how else to explain it. So, but let's dig right in. So now, again, loosely based on the video game. So if you took all the elements from the original Nintendo video games, which at this point I believe there was 3 of them. There was the first one, the second one, and then the third one, which I think had come out pretty recently at this time, like fairly recently. So, huge games, like obviously like video games were blowing up at this time. And also at this time we had like the Ninja Turtles movie and Batman, things that were taking these things that used to be known as like maybe for younger people or kids and making these sort of darker, visceral kind of raw films out of them. And I think they were going for that sort of edge to the film, which you can kind of tell with how like dystopian it is. And it's a very dark film. I mean, there's hardly any color in it until they get their patented Mario Brothers costumes, I guess, at the end. So yeah, just to see it from that sort of angle is interesting. But again, if you took all the elements or most of the elements from the original games and tried to actually adapt them, I mean, I guess my thought when I was watching it is, would it even be interesting? Like, I think maybe this take is more interesting than if they had just taken like, because what else would it be? Just jumping on the heads of these little Goombas or whatever. I don't know. So I think maybe that's why I think maybe it's gotten more credit recently than it used to, because I think people look at it now and say they were actually trying to do something different, And also at this point, again, it was very early on in the franchise of the Mario Brothers, and really actually all the films that we'll be discussing in this series. I think the most interesting aspect is taking this source material, which hasn't been around for that long, and trying to make it make sense as a film and form it into a narrative. And especially before a lot of the lore or the story, like the world building or whatever you want to call it, was even established at this point. Because throughout the years, I think Nintendo has added a lot to the Mario Brothers series and their other video games, and I think they've kind of built out the world a little bit more, and now it sort of makes sense in its own way. But at this time, it was really just a little 8-bit character on screen running around and running from left to right and jumping on enemies, and there were some weird reptilian like enemies, I guess, but they kind of took that and made it into the actual dinosaurs from this film.
Yeah, well, it almost seems like it seems like they were kind of both ahead of their time and like not quite ready, because it almost feels like looking at it retroactively, it feels like the move probably would have been to create like a Pokemon-esque cartoon series or something like that, where like Mario and Luigi are going on adventures. You would
think animated, right?
So the move to go straight live action is like a really like it's just I would be so curious to hear what those initial conversations. I know we're talking a little bit less about the movie itself and a little bit more about kind of how this movie came to be and what it is, but it is just such a fascinating curio, you know what I mean? It's because it's just not something that kind of makes sense, but that's what makes it so fun and wonderful. It's just this real melting pot of ideas where they just because and it's so interesting too, like you mentioned, is how do you get kind of from point A to B? Like what mind looked at those video games? Like, I mean, I guess I understand the logic. All right, it's a couple of Italian guys who are plumbers, so it makes perfect sense to stick them in a city where there are, probably a lot of other Italian guys. And then once they're in a city, a city's going to have this kind of grimy aesthetic. Yeah. So, like, I can kind of see the train of thought, but at the same time is, like, how they got all the way.
Yeah. Apparently they were going for, like, a Wizard of Oz type vibe, at least early on. That was, like, the initial idea, which I think makes sense. Especially when there isn't much story to go off of, you have to do something with it. So it's almost like, okay, so we have this separate world they go into, like a parallel universe sort of thing. Yeah. And that kind of makes the film for you, because that kind of like builds the story for you. And I do think it's an interesting idea, like if having human beings evolve from dinosaurs instead of mammals or like like primates, apes. So, and I like this. The beginning starts off with like Brooklyn, 65 million years ago.
Yeah.
It's just like a funny way to start a movie, and like but that does make it unique. Like you said, like Brooklyn, you don't see it all the time in the movies, and you see Manhattan a lot, but you don't see Brooklyn, and it's like
especially that now you see it because like
now
Lena
it's a little more,
I thought the opening was very Terrence Malick.
Yeah, it was. Which
like
I think it was added on later, that opening, but I do like it. It's just so odd. Like I think it's the voice of Homer Simpson doing the narration. It's just very goofy.
I just think it's great that we're they're not like, oh, we're gonna jump back and give you a little backstory. They're like, we're going all the way back. Yeah, we're going all the way back.
But you do kind of need that explanation, I feel like, because even after watching the film, I'm still a little confused about some of the plot points. But yeah, it's like they go all the way back to when dinosaurs are on the Earth and the comet hits, but. Or does the comet hit? I think it's like there's something different that happens. Or when the comet hits, it creates some sort of parallel rift or something like that, some sort of parallel universe. And but yeah, I like that it's set in Brooklyn, and I like that it's like these two working class kind of plumbers. Like I think that's I actually like that kind of gruff New Yorker take on the Plumber Brothers, because it's actually similar to so there was something before this. There was the series that started in the 80s and it went into the 90s, I believe, with featuring Captain Lou Albano. Have you ever seen that series,
I've not.
Jeremy? Okay.
No.
So that depicts them, the Mario Brothers, as two Brooklyn plumbers. Like that's how they just live in an apartment, and like odd things happen, and there's actually animated segments as well. But that take, I've always kind of liked that more than where Nintendo has actually taken the series in the more recent years, where he's like, he kind of speaks with like, hey, it's a me, Mario, like that kind of like a stereotypical like Italian accent. Like, I don't know. I thought like the idea of like these gruff, like working class New Yorkers like going into this odd world, I've always thought that was more like compelling, I guess. So I actually like that they used that take for this earlier film.
Yeah. No, I did too.
Yeah.
It was a little jarring at first. Like I said, I know a little bit less, or I would probably say significantly less about this kind of universe than you do, Mark. But it was a little jarring.
I probably
at
know
first
way
because,
too much about
yeah, it. Because I was kind of which I think is why this will be an interesting discussion, because I'm just having like this gut reaction to it with no context, and you're
yeah, it's good.
But I like when Mario started speaking, I was like, wait a minute. Like at what point?
Right. Yeah.
Like
in my mind, to the other voice.
Yeah.
Right?
In my mind, I'm like going through the story, trying to figure out like, all right, like how are they gonna work this out? So his voice has to go up 5 octaves.
Exactly.
like how are they gonna make that work?
Yeah.
By the end of the film, yeah, he's like, and then by the end, it's me. Like how's that gonna happen?
Right. So imagine So I think the only versions of the Mario Brothers at this point were like the more gruff New Yorker type take on it, because also there was, again, I know way too much about all this stuff, but there was also like an anime that came out, I believe, around the same time.
Okay.
I think it was before this film, I believe, but it was like it was another take on it that was similar. The voiceover was like that sort of voice as well. So I think maybe that's just where Mario was at that point. That's that's how they portrayed him. So yeah, but taking that and then the juxtaposition between this strange dystopian world they go into, which I definitely want to talk about the world. But before we do that, let's talk about the actors, because I feel like that's like a huge part of this movie and why it is such a cult film. So you have Bob Hoskins and John Leguizamo as the Mario Brothers. Interesting choice. I love Bob Hoskins. He's great in Who Framed Roger Rabbit as well. And he's actually, it's funny because he has like this Cockney like British voice in real life, but he kind of plays these gruff like these types of characters so well. Like he does it in Who Framed Roger Rabbit as well. But I think he's really good. He's
kind of like he's kind of like the human version if you like lit a cigar and like dipped it into a glass of whiskey and then just drank the whole thing. Like
I thought you were gonna say the human version of Mario, because
that's
true.
He's like he's just like, and I feel like you saw a lot of that in kind of these 90s, at least particularly, not that this was animated, but coming from a video game movie, it kind of to me still feels like it's in the same world as like a Space Jam
Yeah.
or Who Framed Roger Rabbit. Like
Yeah.
it's in that same the same spirit of those movies, and
Yeah.
all those movies had this kind of cigar chomping.
Yeah, they have like these
like,
middle-aged guys and like
jazzy, yeah,
You
which
know?
is weird because those were the kids' movies of the like,
yeah,
it's,
it is an odd choice. It's almost like they just like I don't know. They would just cast older back then. They would have older actors. But
Yeah,
I
it's
mean,
like-
I think it works like so well. But also like it could be argued that John Leguizamo is sort of like he's sort of like more the main character in this movie.
yeah,
You know, and he's like the younger guy and
yeah.
definitely
Gets the
not
girl.
definitely not
No.
Italian, but I guess neither is
No.
Bob Hoskins. So you know,
No,
yeah.
I never, yeah.
So he's like a Spanish take on on an Italian, and actually John Leguizamo has said like he's had a funny comment about it, like saying something like, "Oh, you know, we've had Italians playing Latinos like in Scarface
Yeah.
with Al Pacino and stuff like that." So
Yeah,
this
it's about time.
is our take on it, yeah. So,
Yeah.
but yeah, I think they oddly like that combination somehow works between the two. You kind
Mm-hmm.
of believe that they are brothers, or at least closely related in some way.
Yeah,
even
I
though-
could see like an uncle and a nephew.
Yeah, like Bob Hoskins does seem so much older than him, but
Yeah.
they never really say like. I mean, I guess they have the same last name, Mario,
Yeah.
Mario, and Luigi Mario,
Luigi
which
Mario.
was another thing they made up for the movie, I believe. I don't think that was even like a. I think they just kind of were like, all right, they're the Mario brothers, so they both have the same last name. But Mario, yep. And then so we have those two as the main stars, which is interesting, and then we have we have Dennis Hopper, which we've talked about him before on this show about at least a couple times, I'm sure we've brought him up.
Yeah.
What was River's Edge? He was in that. We
Mm-hmm.
talked about that movie. Great as always. Obviously, no clue what the hell he was doing. As with all the actors, I think nobody knew what was going on. What they had signed on for, and apparently the script they signed on for was not the script that they even ended up filming. So that we'll talk about that too. But yeah, so Dennis Hopper, what did you think about him, Jeremy? In this?
I mean, so I'm kind of a Dennis Hopper diehard.
Oh yeah, I love him.
Especially when he's playing some kind of villain,
Yeah,
or
he's
like
just
I mean we talked
completely
about it before.
unhinged, yeah.
Yeah, like we talked about it before, but like the
Blue
movie
Velvet.
that got me into movies was Blue Velvet.
Yeah.
So getting to see Dennis Hopper be evil is like,
Yeah.
it's like my birthday. It's just the greatest thing. And so you know he obviously I think some of the dialogue in this movie you could tell he was kind of like there was some kind of expositional dialogue that you could tell was maybe giving him a little bit of a
You
hard
see
time.
him like
'cause-
almost wincing trying to get through some of the dialogue.
Yeah, because he's like there are points, especially early on, when he's essentially his character is tasked with laying out his evil plan, but the evil plan is kind of more there to just fill the audience in and let us
Makes
know.
no sense. I still don't
Yeah.
understand why he wants to merge the two worlds. I've racked my brain. I'm like, why does he want to? Like, I guess just to rule more worlds, or I guess the world that they inhabit's so crappy that they want a different world. I'm not
Yeah,
sure.
it's so the way I interpreted it was that he was kind of I guess he
Well, I
had
guess we
felt
should
like
say he plays President Koopa,
Yeah.
who's like the tyrannical
or I believe is it President or King Koopa? I think
So he's King Koopa in the video games, but they made him
Okay.
president. So that was one of the alterations they made. But I thought it made sense in this film at least to make him like the. But he's sort of like more like he's more like a dictator. Obviously, this is basically a dictatorship that they've
Yeah.
entered into.
And
And he's
King-
also
King
a
Koopa-
descendant of T-Rex. He's like, so he's like half reptilian sort of.
yeah.
Yeah, but he's like
And
the
King
ruler
Koopa-
of this dimension. Yeah.
King Koopa is Bowser, no?
Yeah, so he's also Bowser.
Okay.
I think at that time he was called King Koopa, and I think that actually changed. I think now they call him Bowser, but at that time he was known as King Koopa. So
Yeah, because
but
I grew
he
up
was
with
always-
Bowser.
Yeah, so he was always like the antagonist of the series. I mean, that's since the very beginning, since the very first game when you encounter him at the end of every castle level in the game, he's always on the bridge shooting flames at you. So
Yeah.
yeah, so he's like the main bad guy. But anyway, sorry to cut you off, but I want to hear more what you think about Dennis.
Yeah, but yeah, so it was like I think how I understood him trying to take over is he almost felt, for lack of a better term, kind of colonized by the mammals, like it was their planet, it was their Brooklyn.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
And then this meteor came and sent them to this kind of parallel dimension underworld, and I guess he generationally is feeling still kind of raw about 65
guess so,
million
yeah.
years later.
He's
talk about a grudge. He's really
yeah. It's also sort of like, well, it's definitely dystopian, but he also mentions, I guess this world is sort of like Dune-like. They never show anything else from the world, but he mentions there's one scene where he actually points to a globe, and he mentions like beyond the city it's just dirt. It's just sand and dirt, like a desert. Mm-hmm. So I guess it's almost like uninhabitable, this world they live in.
Yeah, and so it seemed, and it's like their resources seem kind of sparse. Yeah. They can't build cars with brakes
for some fuels.
Reason.
Haha.
Yeah, exactly. so it kind of just seems like he wanted to, which I guess is in a weird way, if we're breaking down this character, a kind of weird loyalty to his people, because he's kind of like, hey, I want to take this over, so we can have like all this good stuff, but at the same time, it seems like he was kind of an evil dictator ruling over everybody. So his motivations were a little vague, although it seemed like really at the end of the day it was kind of just like he discovered that there was more he could conquer, and he's like, well, I can conquer this dirty thing, like imagine how cool it'll be if I can conquer the nice thing.
I do love how he says mammals too, like mammals. He just hates them so much.
He just hates mammals.
But yeah, I mean, he's a good villain. He's a typical like early 90s kind of, he's almost like an 80s villain.
He's definitely menacing.
The suits that he has on and everything. Yeah. Actually, there was a lot of comparisons, not to get too political. We don't really get political on the show, but there was a lot of comparisons when Trump was president. A lot of
Koopa.
I swear, like all of a sudden I started seeing King Koopa things everywhere. There was a lot of comparisons. I'm just going to throw that out there. It was very interesting.
That's really funny.
It actually got people like sort of talking about this movie again in an odd way. So, and this movie has had sort of a resurgence, which I'll talk about at the end. But so we talked about the cast a little bit. I do want to talk about the directors, like the creative team behind the movie, the writers as well, because that's a huge part of it. So, because there is a reason why this world looks the way it does. So the directors were actually a married team of their names are Annabelle Jankel and Rocky Morton, and they're both from England, so they're both British filmmakers. I think they did a lot of music videos and things like that, but they're primarily known for the TV movie and the series Max Headroom. Which, have you seen that at all? Or do you know anything about Max Headroom? Okay,
I've heard of it. I'm kind of looking at some of the images right now, and it looks very interesting.
So that, if you watch Max Headroom, it looks like the world of Mario Brothers, like it in the movie anyway. It looks, it's very like Blade Runner-esque sci-fi dystopian world that they created, and Max Headroom is that has a lot of cred. Like it's really well known, high quality kind of production, and the design, like the look and design of that show and the movie, like when you look at that and then you look at this movie, it just totally makes sense of why they went that direction, I guess. So the world itself, I mean, what did you think of the parallel world with Koopa's reign and everything? Did you think just not really knowing about Max Headroom or anything? Was that very jarring, I guess, to see that? Or
so I love this aesthetic. The movie that it kept bringing to mind, which they're probably not similar, but you know how it is. Like you see movies when you're like a kid, and something about the feeling will kind of ingrain itself in your head, and you come back to it. I kept thinking of the Dick Tracy movie for some reason.
I just watched that again recently.
Yeah, and kind of like there's something about this vibe of like a really surreal griminess that I just love. I just devour it. It's so fun. I mean, I'm a big film noir lover, and I have been for a long time. And I think like I love whenever someone's able to incorporate film noir in an inventive way. And I thought that this film essentially was a film noir.
Yeah. And again, going back to like Batman, the original Batman 1989 when that came out, and the Ninja Turtles movie, Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles movie when it came out, very dark tones, and even Dick Tracy with all the primary colors and how vibrant it was, it still had that very dark tone to it.
Another good cigar chomping.
Yeah,
I mean, I think that we should coin the genre that this set of films in the early 90s were the cigar chompers.
Yeah, I like it. It's true, and I don't know why they went that direction. I guess maybe because I think part of it was like, so I think a lot of people in the industry, in the film industry at least, had this perception that video games are for kids, comic books are for kids. So let's bring some older actors, some esteemed actors. We got, Warren Beatty, we have Bob Hoskins, and let's bring these older people, these actors in, and maybe we'll get people thinking that, hey, maybe this is for adults as well as kids, or I'm not sure exactly what the thinking was. Now I think a lot of these properties and these franchises, these video games and comic book things, obviously comic books can stand on their own and they don't need to think that way. But I think at that time, maybe that's where their head was at. It was because it was so early on with all these types of films,
Yeah, I think they landed on a really interesting thing, though, in all these movies. And once again, the focus of this particular one is Super Mario Bros. But, when you talk about a movie, you talk about the time it came out and in the movies that were around it. And I think that it is a really interesting thing when you look at this idea that they didn't quite know how to sell these kind of kids, kind of adult properties. But I think because of that, a lot of these movies are really inventive because they had the kind of cinematic seriousness of an adult movie. Like, they looked really good. Like this. I mean, this movie is beautifully shot. Like, the production design and everything is phenomenal.
Not to cut you off again, I just wanted to mention. Sorry, there's a lot of information about this film.
Please.
Trying to fit as much in as I can. But you mentioned the production design. So this movie actually has the same art director as Blade Runner. Which makes
total sense. Absolutely.
I actually forgot that until I read it after this last time I watched it, and I was like, okay. So, because this world is like very dark, dystopian. It's like cyberpunk sort of. I guess before that was even a thing, really. But and they definitely called upon their experience developing and shooting Max Headroom. You should check out Max Headroom, Jeremy. I think you would.
Yeah, I'd like to.
It has that kind of aesthetic to it, but it's also mixed with like this reptilian human hybrid things and this strange fungus, which we'll talk about as well, going on. So it has like, and when I read about how the art director went about doing it, he actually said that he had he's never had so much freedom to kind of do what he wanted, and he had this really cool space to work in. It was like bigger than any studio he could have worked in. It was like some sort of like converted thing with like concrete everywhere and stuff. So he loved, I think he just kind of like got into it as much as he could and really went for it. And you can tell it with the set design and production design and everything. It really looks cool.
I mean, it's pretty stunning. It's like, like I'm just looking at some images just from the movie, particularly of like the wides of the city, and like the details pretty breathtaking. Like the little
because there's like the scaffoldings and there's different levels and things like that.
Yeah, the scaffolding, the lighting, the kind of neon. Like even I'm looking at the detail. They're like the way the street lights are set up. They're like these pointy kind of. They almost look like the tips of arrows. The cars like those cars were like a combination of like a DeLorean and Mad Max. You know, it was like they're really, and it's pretty outstanding. Even like the signs, like I'm seeing here, there's a big "Vote for Koopa" sign, which kind of brings to mind almost like They Live. Like there's really a lot of cool visual stuff. I think the thing, like the story is confusing, but this is one of those movies which ultimately is probably where they found their audience, even if it wasn't intended. That like is totally just made for people who are like hanging out, eating pizza with their friends, maybe like smoking a bong,
smoking something,
it's like, because it's not really a kids movie. It's kind of a movie that's just like a visual feast that's just so fun to get lost in, and the story's not as important as the vibe.
The effects and the production design, actually they got a lot of accolades. They were actually considered to be, they were almost nominated for an Oscar, I believe. But I think Nightmare Before Christmas came out at the same time, and obviously that got nominated over it. But this movie, even at the time, even though it was known as like a box office bomb or whatever, and was sort of a failure, I was reading a lot of like reviews and critics from the time that they all mentioned that there is a lot to enjoy about the film, just visually, like just the way it looked, and even with the digital effects that were starting to be at this time integrated into films more. This was sort of like a pioneer, oddly enough. They used like some software, I forget what it's called now, but it became like the standard after this, and like for like CGI and stuff like that. So they were, I think visually they had a lot going on, and like with the effects and stuff like that, and even with the world. Like honestly, I wanted to see more of it. Like there's a scene in like a nightclub sort of space or dance club, whatever it is, And I was like, this is cool. Like, I want to see like the bars and stuff. Like, I want to see like what this world looks like. It's almost like a Star Wars kind of thing.
You know what it is? It almost feels like there should be a video game that exists totally in that. You know what I mean? Like,
exactly, yeah. Well, it's funny because we'll talk about Street Fighter, that movie, and they actually created an entire video game based off of the movie.
The movie, yeah.
With like the actual actors in it, even though the movie was based off a video game. But yeah, I agree. I think it would be really cool to see more of this world. I know they did release a webcomic, I believe, that's like a sequel to this movie. It came out, I think, like 2013 or something like that. I haven't actually seen it, but I think it was done in affiliation with somebody that was actually involved with the production of the movie, and like where they would have taken the story, you know, had this been a success and all that. So yeah, I would have loved to see more of this world. I think, again, like cult status, I think people are into it now. Like the more they think about it, like, yeah, I want to see more of this world and like what's going on here, you know? So it is really cool. Definitely a lot of like dark elements and a lot of cool stuff going on. So we talked about Max Headroom, and that's like, because first it was like Wizard of Oz. They wanted to do something with, you know, related to Wizard of Oz, going into a new world. And at first they were going to do something a little more medieval, it seems like, or just they wanted to go like, you know, fantasy tropes or something like that. And eventually they settled on this sort of like punk sci-fi kind of dystopian aesthetic, and I think it really works. You know, I think it's not what you would expect, 100%, not at all, from Mario Brothers. But you know, that's the way they went. That's you know, I think it gave us something at least. Yeah, I know.
I'm glad. I don't think. I think if they had went in the more conventional Mario direction, I don't think we'd be talking about this movie.
Yeah.
On this, at least on this podcast.
Well, speaking of direction, I want to talk about Nintendo a little bit, because we talked about the stars of the film, the directors, but we haven't really mentioned Nintendo at all, which is funny because this is their property. That, you know, they created Mario Brothers. So Nintendo's involvement with this film, actually we'll call it like a lack thereof, because honestly they had no interest at all in creative control when it came to the movie. They held on to like branding rights and things like that, like the commercial rights to it and stuff like that. And obviously they still have the rights to Mario Brothers. But at the time, when they were approached about making a film, they sort of just put their trust into these filmmakers and said, sure, go make a movie. They were sort of curious to see how it would turn out. You know, they at the time, I guess, believed that Mario was a strong enough brand to allow for this sort of experimentation with another industry. So it's sort of like refreshing. And I mean, I don't think it would ever happen now, especially with Nintendo after what happened. But I think they looked at this movie as like, sure, yeah, you want to make a movie out of our video game? Okay, let's see what you can do, you know. And I think they were intrigued by the initial ideas and stuff like that were brought to them. So they kind of just took a standoff approach, and they kind of stepped aside and just let them do what they wanted. So very interesting. And I think that's a big reason why this movie looks the way it does and is the way it is, because Nintendo really didn't have much say. They didn't really want to. But now I think it might
have been a thing, because I just feel like at that point in time, and I could be wrong, but it didn't seem like the idea of IP was as prevalent. It was probably kind of more something along the lines of, it was
well known, but it wasn't the powerhouse that it's become, for sure.
But it's probably something more along the lines of like, a movie studio wants to write us a fat check to use the Mario name, and then if the movie makes money, we'll make a bunch of money. Like, okay.
Yeah.
Like that sounds great.
Also, when you're comparing what, the film that you want to make to like Wizard of Oz and like Ghostbusters, they were talking about, like, when you compare it to these really like iconic, successful films, then of course, like, they were probably talked into it, like, oh, okay, this could be cool. And I'm sure they were shown maybe some of like the early, concept art and stuff like that. So,
well, I mean, this is one of those movies where even watching like the dailies, you would have to be thinking like, shit, this is amazing.
I mean,
like looking at it aesthetically, I feel like it's one of those things where unless you're watching it beginning to end and kind of seeing that the story is confusing, which is fine. I have no problem with a confusing story, but for a kind of family movie, a confusing story, a family movie that was supposed to make a lot of money, a confusing story is a problem. But like, you have to imagine someone they're shooting it out of order, as almost all movies do. And so if you're an executive and you're coming in and looking at these shots that they're getting, you're probably like, Jesus, like, Dennis Hopper's mean and the city's beautiful, and it's like, wow, this is gonna be a great,
Yeah, this looks great. Yeah.
Yeah.
But that's a good segue, actually, because now we're getting into the production of the film, and I definitely want to talk about. There's a lot to discuss. I'm sure I won't hit on all of it, but I want to just give a little brief overview of what went on behind the scenes while they were filming. So even before they started shooting, so the script was sort of like a mess from the beginning. There were tons of different takes on it. The screenwriter of Rain Man, I can't think of his name right now, but he did a version of the script. I think he was actually the very first one to write the script, and it was basically like Rain Man. It was like a cross country road trip between these two brothers, and it was like introspective and all this. Like, it's so bizarre to think about, but I think
that's really
the executives looked at that and they were just like, no, that's not happening. So, but to know that version exists in some parallel world is really interesting. Sort of like this independent film, like road movie. So anyway, but they took the idea of the brothers, like that was something that they wanted to convey, like this relationship between the two brothers. So that was something that throughout all the script iterations, like there was always there. But the idea for the film did change a lot, and they went through a lot of different rewrites and versions and writers too. I think there's a lot of different writers involved, and till eventually they got to this script that was, which is very similar to what we saw, but apparently. So that was a script that was signed off on by Bob Hoskins and the rest of the actors and everyone. But several weeks before shooting began, Walt Disney came in, and they purchased the distribution rights to the film, and they actually at the same time demanded significant rewrites to the script. So
interesting.
Again, this was weeks before they were about to shoot, so the sets were already built. The actors had their lines probably already memorized. It was they were ready to shoot, and Disney came in and said, "Hey, we're going to change a lot of stuff here." So the director Rocky Morton, he said, or one of the directors, Rocky Morton, said that the final result was a script that was not at all like the script that he and his wife Jankel had, and the cast had signed on to film. So everyone, that includes the directors even. So everyone that the film that they had signed on to was not the film that they actually ended up, filming. So so that's why like the tone of the script. So I think the tone was mainly what changed, because they couldn't change too much. Like I said, the sets had already been built and all that. So I think the tone, but the tone is what's so weird. It's like it sort of goes back and forth between this family film and like. Sort of like almost like an Indiana Jones adventure film, and then there's like this odder stuff like when they're in the nightclub dancing, and so I think there was
like something much darker.
Yeah, like obviously there's something like a lot darker going on, and like the the people on the street that get like basically just get like arrested for no reason and like picketing and stuff like that. There's like these different ideas going on. And apparently there was even a scene, John Leguizamo has mentioned it in his book, I think, like there was a scene shot with like strippers or something like that.
Oh my God.
Which like at the time he was like just staring at it like, this is supposed to be a kid's movie, like what are they doing?
Yeah.
Like, so,
although I would low-key love to see the R-rated cut of...
So, well, I'll get to that later, but there is an extended cut. I do want to talk about that. We'll get to that for sure. So there are, so they shot a lot more probably than they even ended up using in the finished film. So, but to go back to the actors a little bit, so first off, like especially out of the main actors like Bob Hoskins, John Leguizamo, and Dennis Hopper, they've all said in later years that they've come out and kind of said like that was the worst thing I ever did. Filming that was horrible. A lot of them have said some mean stuff about the director team, the husband and wife director team, basically calling them pretentious and not open to other people's ideas and kind of just being set in stone about what they wanted to do, even though the actors and everyone else is being told different things by different people. So I think it was just confusing for everyone and not a pleasant set at all. And John Leguizamo has been especially candid in more recent years, about discussing the film and what went on behind the scenes when they were shooting it. And there's a lot of stories. I'm not going to go into all of them. But he's pretty gossipy, that John Leguizamo. He's actually released a couple books that I think they're basically just him talking about like different celebrities he's met and stuff, like like just weird interactions he's had with people on sets and on talk shows too. I know he's talked about just how horrible it was to film this movie, and the fact that him and Bob Hoskins were pretty inebriated throughout the entire filming. Like, I think they got drunk before their scenes, and I think in between takes they were taking swigs of stuff, and they just I guess in order to get through it, because again, like, to their credit, they had signed on to a film, and I'm sure it was an odd film to begin with, but they probably just thought it was like, hey, like, it's it's a family adventure film, whatever, we'll do it. But then when they received this completely different script, when they got on set, I'm sure they were pissed about it. Yeah. And maybe this is like their little rebellion or their way to get through it again. It's just,
well, you have to imagine, for an actor, it's a little different than most other people on a film crew.
You're just
to get a different script, because when a movie is really bad, and it's because of like when a movie's really bad and the performances are bad, it can kill an actor's career, especially like a big budget movie. So there's got to be this thing, especially for John Leguizamo, who at that point, I don't think he was like he was known, but I don't think
it was pretty early on. I think he was mostly like a stand-up or one-man show kind of.
He's still not exactly like a household, like people know John Leguizamo, but it's not like Martin Scorsese's like, oh, I need a lead for my new movie.
He is good,
which would be cool.
John Leguizamo is a really good actor. Like, when he has 100% said that he is not good in this movie. Like, he admits to that, but I think it's because there was so much going on.
I know. I'm not. There's no John Leguizamo. Yeah, there's no slander here. I think he's a terrific actor. But I'm just saying, like, it wasn't like he was like. So it's like an up and coming actor,
right?
And all of a sudden they're changing the script, and he's not feeling good about where it's going.
Yeah.
And also, like, he's kind of, as far as I know, more kind of done supporting roles or kind of character stuff. So all of a sudden he kind of gets a role that's essentially a lead, and I would imagine he's feeling like, oh shit, this isn't going well, and I think it's going to make me look bad. Like, that as an actor would have to
early
be
on in your career, that's like it's like a kiss of death there. I mean, he was working with veteran actors. I mean, we have Dennis Hopper, which he's like a legend. At this point, he was even a legend. And then Bob Hoskins, who was another veteran actor. So he was probably looking at them and seeing how they were reacting to it and being like, oh, God, we're in for it here. But I think they tried to just make the best they could out of it by getting drunk and whatnot. Then there's one story I wanted to mention where, how they the Mario Brothers, they drive around in that minivan, I guess. It's sort of like their plumbing van. I guess... I'm not sure. Now, I don't know if both of them were drunk, if just one of them was. I'm not sure. But at one point, John Leguizamo was driving the van, and I think he did like a turn or something, and the door was open at the time, and Bob Hoskins had his hand like right where the door was, sticking outside the door, and the door like went and just slid over and slammed onto his he got really injured like on his hand from that. I think there's actually shots in the movie where he has his hand covered, or he's kind of tried to hide it, because he did get injured from that. But that's just one story from, I'm sure, plenty of stories from this set. You can look it up and read interviews with, a lot of the cast and crew in recent years, actually, not really at the time, but later on, they started to talk about the movie more, I think because it was just so painful for them at the time, and it was such a flop when it came out. It was definitely a financial failure and a critical failure, besides the visual effects. So yeah, they really didn't talk about it till later on, but once the actors and the crew started talking about it more, they just would tell all these stories about it, and you start to see how this film sort of formed into what we see when we watch it now. It's as odd as it is, whenever there's too many cooks in the kitchen, this is kind of what happens, I think, with a lot of films that are considered bad, quote unquote. So it was not a good experience for a lot of these people. And but again, I think recently people come back to this movie and they see things in it that are interesting or entertaining, and they they respond to it better than they did at the time, because I think these expectations were so built up, because Mario Brothers, the video game, was not, again, Jeremy, like you said, it's not what it is now, but it was still huge. I mean, it was a big deal at that time. There had been 3 games that came out at least for the Nintendo, and it was the first video game movie, so there was a lot riding on it too. And it was not what people were expecting, pretty much. So, but worth watching for sure. I think if anything to come away with at the end of this, I want to say that it is I think if you're listening to this podcast, you definitely want to take a look at this movie.
Yeah, for sure. It's a fun watch. It's one of those ones, we say this every now and then on the podcast. Watch it with your friends who you like to laugh with.
Yeah.
But also who you like to have heady discussion with, because it will provide both. It's funny, but it's also just a fun, really beautiful, like, collage. It's like
collage. That's a good way to describe it.
It's a collage. It's a fun one to watch with friends for sure.
I couldn't even say if you're a fan of the video games, you should check this out, because really it really is not like the games at all.
No, it's more if you're a fan of bizarre movies.
If you like Max Headroom, Blade Runner.
Yeah.
It's definitely a goofier take. They were going for a family film for sure, but there's elements of darkness that we talked about, and a lot of that comes down to the set design, I think. And so the last thing I wanted to touch on was just, because this was adapted from the video game, and it's almost like unrecognizable. Even now, when I watch this film, I'm like, oh, that's supposed to be that from the video game. Okay, so I just wanted to go over some of these things because I think they're pretty interesting. Because a lot of the elements from the original game, again, they're there. Many of them are there, just not as you would expect. So you have to look for them. And these are interpretations, I guess, based off, again, the minimal source material that they had at the time, because there was not much story to draw from. So even like their last names that we discussed, like Mario and Luigi Mario, I don't know if that was even established at that point. They might have just been coming up with that. And then there's the... okay, so this is a good example. So in the game, and I think it's Super Mario World. So actually, there might be like 4 games that have come out this time, because I think even the Super Nintendo one might have come out this time. So in the game, there's this little dinosaur character that Mario can ride around on called Yoshi. You've heard of Yoshi, right? He shows up.
I do know Yoshi.
You would know him if you saw him. He's like a very bright green little dinosaur that Mario can ride around on. So there were, dinosaurs did exist in this world of the video game. So, but now how does the movie explain this? So Yoshi and all of the other reptilian dinosaur-like characters from the video game, including Bowser or King Koopa, is explained by the plot of the film. Like, just the plot of the film itself involving this parallel world where humans evolved differently from dinosaurs rather than primates. They kind of took, like, okay, there's a dinosaur in the video game, so how can we take that and use that? And that was just one example of that, because Yoshi is in the movie. He looks nothing like he does in the video games. No. He looks just like a little dinosaur, Yeah. So that's just one example of that. But even the way they enter the world, and there is a scene later on where they go through pipes. So it's like, so the way that they enter the world, the Mario Brothers, is like, even in like, it's in a way that's even tangentially related to plumbing and pipes. But there you go. It's like, They go and there's a big pipe there, and there's even a scene later on where they're kind of going on like this raft through through this huge pipe, and so you go through pipes in the video game a lot, so they kind of did include that, so the Goombas, who are like the main villains in the game, just these generic bad guys that you jump on top of, they are in the movie as well, and they are like the generic bad guy in the movie. They're the reptilian creatures that have been de-evolved using the de-evolver machine, which we haven't even mentioned, but that's another thing. And then Toad, the character, is a little mushroom-headed character from the video games, and he shows up in the movie as Street Busker for some reason. Yeah,
which was really interesting.
Yeah, it's pretty much by name only, because they call him Toad in the movie, but really, that's about it. So the nod is there, and the fungus is also... it's in the third Mario Brothers game. It's the mushroom. Well, first of all, it's the Mushroom Kingdom, where Mario is in the video game. So they kind of took that and I guess made this more. They incorporated a lot of fungus. There's a lot of fungus in the movie, which we haven't even really talked about. And actually, in the third game, the ruler of the Mushroom Kingdom or one of the kings is like, he's sort of like encased in this fungus. And you have to save him and get him out of it. Well, and actually, in the movie, they do show the king being like sort of like coming out of this fungus, and at the end of the movie, he comes out. So again, there's like it's almost like you see a lot in movies now, like Easter eggs and just sort of like nods to things that people know about. And there's a lot of that in the movie. I mean, there's the jumping boots, there's the bob-omb, there's this is the last one I'll talk about, but at the end of the movie, I mentioned earlier in the show how at the end of every castle level in the original Mario Brothers game, you'd always have that final confrontation with Bowser or King Koopa on the bridge, and he'd always be shooting fire at you, because he's actual. He looks more like an actual dinosaur, like a dragon or something. So in this movie, they actually sort of have that because they're on.
Yeah, that's a good point.
Towards the end of the film, they're on these steel walkways, and Koopa and Mario confront each other, and Koopa actually has like a flamethrower that he's using on Mario. So again, it's like they sort of took these ideas and sort of they just changed them in really weird ways.
Yeah.
And of course, by the end of the movie, Mario and Luigi are finally wearing their iconic red and green jumpsuits, which is something that we'll see again, especially in Street Fighter, that we're going to discuss next. It's almost like these Easter eggs. Instead of like actually just taking the games and adapting them, they just like gave you these little glimmers of things from the game. So I thought it was pretty interesting. Yeah. But that was pretty much all I wanted to mention. There's a lot of stuff like that. I mean, again, we really just hit on the surface level of a lot of this. And the last thing I did want to mention, we brought it up before, but there is a Blu-ray release of this film that came out fairly recently, within the last few years, I think. And it does have deleted scenes and an alternate extended cut, actually, with additional scenes added back in. It's actually from a work print, I believe a VHS work print. So maybe not the best quality, but I think it was the best that they could have done. Unfortunately, it's only in the European region so far, I think. They might be working, and actually I saw they were working on a 4K restoration of the film, which will be released in America. So I'll be keeping an eye out for that. I think it's...
Do you think it'll get a Criterion?
I wish. That'd be so cool. I think cool. You know what? I think it'll get a good release because I think there is that renewed interest in the film now. And I think, and for me to see this film, looking at it, watching it in a much better quality, because even the DVD, I actually had the DVD for this film, and
cool.
The quality is just, I think it's actually notorious for being kind of like bad. So it was not the best quality. So I would love to see like a restored version of it. And I have online, there's some people have posted things of of restored versions of the film, and it looks great. It looks really good. Yeah. So I would love to see that. And I guess that was pretty much it for what I wanted to discuss. So the last thing I wanted to talk about. So we talked about Nintendo a little bit and how they were not involved with this film, but I believe in 2022, which is this year, they are releasing an animated Mario Brothers movie. So very, very soon it will be coming out in the near future, and I'm sure it will be filled with all of the worlds and characters and the imagery from the games that people know and love. But I think that will just make this movie stand out even more as something that's really different and unique. And I think, that the film that's going to come out from Nintendo, they have like Chris Pratt in it as one of the, like Jack Black as one of the voices. So I'm sure it'll be very slick, and I'm sure it'll look great. I'm sure it'll be a very good looking production. But just the fact that we have this early 90s film, this take on the Mario Brothers, is just so cool. And it can only happen in the 90s, I think. Yeah.
I wonder if we get an Easter egg in the new movie.
I hope so.
About the 90s, about this.
I hope so.
Interesting.
Unless Nintendo's just tried to completely forget about it at this point, but
who knows? Yeah, who knows?
Yeah, but it could certainly only happen in the 90s. This movie, and actually when it came out, Nintendo, like the reception to the film was so bad that Nintendo was hesitant to create another film based off one of their properties, up until Pokemon Detective Pikachu, which came out in 2019. So this film came out in '93. So it took that long for Nintendo to even consider making another film based off one of their properties, which is kind of crazy. And that is really it now. Oh, one more thing. Trust the fungus.
Trust the fungus.
Trust the fungus. Okay. Jeremy, did you have any last words for Mario Bros?
Just a couple quick things. So one thing that I just want to note was the soundtrack for this movie was wonderfully eclectic. It
was all over the place.
Some really cool cuts. There's a single actually that was released with the movie called Almost Unreal by Roxette, which I really enjoyed. I have a soft spot for kind of 80s, 90s ballads. But then just going through this soundtrack, we have everything from George Clinton to Marky Mark at the Funky Bunch, Joe Satriani, Megadeth, Queen.
Again, 90s. Yep.
It's all over, which is fun. I don't know. I think it's fun. Also, the song with George Clinton, and well, it's listed as George Clinton and the Goombas, so that's cool. But the song "Walk the Dinosaur," Walk the Dinosaur.
Oh, how could you forget that one? Yeah.
Yeah, it's a jam. Definitely.
It is.
I put that on one of my Spotify playlists, so
Nice.
so worth checking out. And then the last thing to note, as we like to talk about movie posters.
Oh yeah.
This one is an interesting one because you have this big metal M on a black background with the brothers, who don't really look in the illustration a whole lot like they do in the movie, which is okay. I'm fine with that. And then they're also wearing outfits that I'm not sure we see them wear in the movie either, but maybe. It might be like their initial outfit. But then the tagline is, "This ain't no game."
This ain't no game. See, so even from the beginning, they're trying to differentiate themselves.
They're trying to differentiate, which is very telling.
Definitely. Yeah, even the expressions on their face, the actors' faces, is like, oh god.
Yeah.
What have we done?
Yeah. Interesting little things that you pick up on in the film itself, and then also the materials around it.
Yeah, a lot to discuss, a lot to look into. And again, we only kind of skimmed the surface on this one. Like, oddly enough, it's one of those movies like you can stay up late in bed just like reading up on it and reading all the different stuff. But it's a lot. it's something. And I think this is only the beginning for us, Jeremy, because we're doing the 90s video game adaptations, and next time we're going to be discussing Street Fighter from 1994, which I'm also very excited to talk about. It's like one of my notorious bad movies that I just always watch and enjoy. And my friend Dave, he has his own podcast called Super Movie Bros, and similar to this movie. And we have talked. It's been a running gag that like I always wanted him to talk about Street Fighter the movie. So we never got to do it, but we're gonna try to get him on that episode of the show to finally subject him to talking about this movie. So we'll see if that goes through or not. But yeah, I guess did you have any last notes about this film, Super Mario Brothers from 1993?
No, I think we pretty much hit on everything that I was hoping to talk about.
Yeah. There was a lot to talk about for sure.
Yes.
But join us next time where we will be talking about more of these 90s video game adaptations with Street Fighter from 1994. So thank you for listening to Cult Movie Cult. You can find us on Twitter, Instagram, and Facebook. If you have any cult films you'd like to hear us discuss on the show, or if you'd like to officially join the cult, be a guest on the show, please feel free to reach out to us at cultmoviecult@gmail.com. This has been a Cult Movie Cult, and until next time, so long from the other side.